Well, let me welcome everybody. Pastor Tim here from Bethany Church, Kittery Point, and we are doing a Zoom chat here today with Lou Phillips and Shawn Hart from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Many of you probably remember Lou and Will, who is also who is currently with Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, and they were both living up in the Kittery area for about a year, and they spoke on various topics, and they actually traveled amongst our several campuses talking about tough questions connected to God. Lou and Shawn both live down now in Atlanta as they work with RZIM. So thank you guys for joining us today. And Shawn, why don't we start with you? If you can just give us a little background on yourself and how you got connected to RZIM.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. I wish I could be there with you guys. I heard that it's a beautiful place up there. So eventually one day I'll have to try to make it up there.
Come visit.
A little background. I've been married for 15 years. Have three kids, 9, 7, and 4. And yeah, we're down here in Atlanta. We've moved around a ton. My wife and I are originally from Portland, Oregon, and both born and raised there. Absolutely loved it there. And then we went and we were missionaries in Southern Sudan. And after that, we were on a little island called Mayotte. It's a Muslim people group there off the coast of Madagascar, Mozambique. So that was from 2008 to 2012. And I followed RZIM since I became a Christian at age 22. And then, eventually went over to the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics, where Lou and I both studied, just different years. Then came on with RZIM about 2 years after my studies there. I worked in campus ministry in Portland at Portland State University after the Oxford program. And then it was a year after that, actually, that I came on and worked with RZIM in Washington, D.C. for a year, before then coming down to Atlanta, where I serve as the director of ministries for the Zacharias Institute that we have here and speak for the ministries. So yeah, that's a little background on me.
Great. Thank you, Shawn. And Lou, if you could kind of reintroduce yourself. You're a familiar face for a lot of folks who are going to be watching this.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everybody at Bethany, especially the Kittery Point. I miss you guys. I definitely do miss living in Maine. But yeah, for those that don't know me or haven't heard me speak at one of your churches, my name's Lou, originally from Pittsburgh. I got introduced to RJM through the same thing that Shawn was talking about, the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics. I ended up going to that program after figuring out I wasn't supposed to be going to med school. Those of you that know my story, that was really what I was pursuing all my life. And then a couple of years ago, ended up doing the program there, and then started speaking for them immediately. And so I've been speaking with RZM for the last almost 2 years now. First year was up in the New England area, and now I'm down here in out in Atlanta.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys for joining me. For those folks who are watching, I'll put links down in the description section when this video is posted on YouTube to RZIM, so you can find more out about those guys and what they're doing internationally, as well as in the States here. But for today, we've talked around the edges. I was sharing with these gentlemen earlier that we've talked around the edges as a church about the coronavirus and COVID-19 and this whole pandemic. I think we've addressed some of the topics, but I wanted today to spend some time talking with these guys about directly, where does God fit into this equation of a global pandemic? And so, Shawn, I'll just start with that kind of as a broad question for you. When you think of this question of God and the pandemic, and people are in their head saying, how do these things fit together? What are some of the ways that you kind of frame that in your own mind as you process through what's going on today?
Yeah, and I'll try to maybe just give 1 or 2 points. There's a lot that could be said on this topic, but with two of us, we'll try to, and I'll see what Lou says, and there might be more to share even after he says on this. But I think just as an introduction to this point, even, I think one of the first things that comes to a lot of our minds in this is that question of, like, where are you, God? Especially in light of the the widespread reach of this thing, and just how it's now getting to the point where I'm feeling like everybody is somehow connected to someone somewhere who is suffering, or like just recently some people we know connected with our ministry have died from it. And this is becoming more and more common, and it will continue to be more and more common. And so the question is very understandable. And I first want to rush to the scriptures and say, how have other people wrestled with this? And looking at the Psalms, when David is facing a hard time asking, like, where are you, God? Just to say that Christianity gives us permission to actually ask this question, which I'm very thankful for. It's not just a place where it's just like, well, no, you can't ask this question. You can't actually ask where God is in this, because that would show that you lack faith, or sometimes people can actually put shame on people for even asking the question. So I guess I want to first just even start with a permission to ask, and say, like, when we ask this question, it's a very natural outflow that we see people wrestling through these situations with God in Scripture. But I also then want to kind of from there then pivot and say that, like, I'm a little bit concerned with any thought or question that starts with the assumption that God is the problem in these types of situations, as if he's responsible for evil and some evil and suffering in the world. That I think is oftentimes just a natural outflow of our natural, the world that we are currently living in. It's a broken world with broken things happening. That means disease and distress and famine, and all these things will happen in our world that is broken. And when I look at it that way, I don't see God as actually like the responsible in that sense. So there are spiritual dark powers that are at play in our world, but a lot of times, a lot of these things for me, when I think about it, just come down to this idea that we live in a world that is absolutely broken. But this idea of where's God in it, I think as we can talk more about the specific places, but I want to say God is with us in it. That's the other thing about Christianity, is that yes, God created us. The world is broken by something that we did, but God does not leave us on our own in that. And the way I kind of have thought this through a little bit is that, like, it's in the sense of thinking, like, if we want to put it in some of the terms of crisis and pandemic, is that we as human beings created a crisis on earth with our sin. And we've lived in a crisis situation ever since that fall that we read back in Genesis. But God didn't wash his hands of us in the crisis that we created. God stepped into our crisis and actually made that crisis his problem. And he actually went to the cross for us. So I see uniquely Christianity, I think, speaks to a God who is absolutely with us. Now, again, I'll pitch it over to Lou, and we can maybe even revisit more. But I want to first, I guess, just start with saying, I think God is with us. Now, there's a lot of questions that flow out from that, in like, well, why would he allow, and how do these type of things happen in light of a God who interacts with us and cares for us, that you say is caring, but he's allowing this to happen. So I'll leave it there. Did that just get interrupted? Because I had to deny it.
We lost your video, but your audio stayed on, so I think we're good.
Sorry, I had a call come in. So I'll leave it there and pitch it over to Lou, and then I can also see what else could be added.
Yeah, that's good. Lou,
Thank you.
I'd like to hear from you too. I know that you wrote an article about this that was posted by RZIM, so you can obviously feel free to tap into that. And just want to tell our viewers now, I'll also put a link to Lou's article down, so you can in the description section, so you can hear some of his other thoughts on this. But jump in, Lou, your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you, Shawn. As soon as I heard that question, similar to Shawn, I thought in that same frame of reference, but I also still think of like the kind of like the two parties of Christianity, or the two wings of it. And some are going to be very convinced, no, God is sovereignly in control of every aspect of this, is ordained. And the other ones are like, no, God's relinquished some control to, because of sin, he's not. And regardless of where you sit on that, because I do realize, regardless who we're talking to as Christians, there's going to be people on different sides of that. And my point of view on that is kind of irrelevant. Find your own reasoning and what you think Scripture is saying. Regardless of where we are on that, I still think the core, from a Christian point of view, is where is God in all of this? He's right there. He's right there in the midst with all of us. Because if God had his hand in the cross, if he was sitting, he was there in the midst of it. I mean, everything we believe in the Christian faith hinges on the cross, right? It hinges on the cross and the resurrection, which is such a beautiful time right now for us to think about as Easter Sunday is coming. So he's here. Why is he allowing it to happen? Gosh, it's such a hard question. We don't understand because we don't have the mind of God, and we can't see what he's doing in a larger scale, it's really, really difficult to trust him in this. And I think that's actually what I was trying to get to in that article, Tim, was like, what happens when we don't feel like God is trustworthy anymore? Like, what do we do with the doubts that we have? And one of the things that I wanted to bring up in that article was specifically, there's different ways we can doubt, right? I think some would say, if you're doubting, that's a lack of faith and that's sin immediately. And I firmly disagree with that. I think the Bible actually gives us room to wrestle with doubt. There's a difference between unbelief and doubt. But the example I wanted to point to was John the Baptist. And so we know, man, John was just killing it as an individual, right? This is the guy that Christ says, of all the men born of women, nobody's greater than this guy. This is the guy who baptized Christ and saw the Holy Spirit descending on him like a dove. He's the one that said, look, behold the Lamb of God. He's the one preparing the way for Christ to come. So here's a guy that's just doing it well. And if anybody's going to be just convinced that Christ is who he says he is, that Christ is God himself, it would have been John. And then we read later that actually once he is thrown into prison, he starts doubting. And in a similar way, I feel like that's just, it's crisis, right? It's things didn't turn out the way I want them to be. And it's kind of like where we're at right now in a different way, but similar. God, where are you? I thought we were doing things the way we should. What are you doing? And so he sends his messengers back to Christ and he says, are you really him, or should we be looking for someone else? Right. Mm-hmm. And you'd expect Christ's response to be rebuke, because Christ rebuked a lot of people with a lack of faith, or they weren't coming. But for some reason, he tells his disciples, go and tell John, the blind now see, the lepers are cleansed, and good news is preached to the poor. He actually, and then once they leave, he actually just boasts about John to all the people sitting there. That's actually when he says, of any man born of woman, he's the greatest. Here, my question is, why did Christ respond differently there? And if I compared his doubt, his like, Christ, are you really who you say you are, to the thief on the cross, right? Here's another person that asked Christ the exact same question. Are you really who you say you are? But here's the distinct difference between these two people. One has conditions. Jesus, are you really who you say you are? Prove it. Get me off this cross. Get us both off this cross, because that's how you can prove it. And yet John, all he needed to know is, Jesus, are you really who you say you are? Because if that's actually the case, then I don't need to get out of jail. I don't need to have the answer for all this. I can, if you truly are who you say you are, it changes everything, because I know that you're God and you can be trusted when things don't make sense. And so the heart behind that, I was actually just listening to a sermon, and I realized, man, how often do I doubt like the thief versus like John the Baptist, where I demand that Christ, if you really are who you say are, because what we think we need right now more than anything else is a vaccine, economic stability, all these things. And those are all great things. I'm not saying we shouldn't want this as Christian, but that's not what we need more than anything else. What we need is a constant reminder of the gospel, and that God's grace is sufficient for us in the midst of these types of things. And that's not fun often. Like, let's be real. And we're speaking to it's going to be mostly Americans here. We have very comfortable lives, and it's really difficult to even start wrestling with why God would let these types of things happen, because we're so interested in our comfort and are so interested in being able to live our lives the way we should. And what I'm very grateful for in the midst of this is that God often uses, we know this from the story of Joseph, what even Satan himself desired to be, what he wanted to be evil, what he wanted to be, God can make it good. God can turn these things into some beautiful things. And I'm praying that this is a time that it really just brings revival in the church, and we start realizing the things that we valued that we shouldn't have, the things that we prioritized. And even, let's just take the example right now, we can't even meet at church. How often do we miss church because we were lazy and we didn't want to go because I was tired? Now we're craving community. And I think God's reordering our loves in a lot of ways. He's saying, using something, what appears to be so wicked, and he's coming in and showing us, let's correct these narratives, because he genuinely does love us. He knows that when we don't desire him above all else, it's our lives that are in misery, not his, right? He desires for us to be alongside him, and that's not going to happen when we have all these other things in our way and we're serving them above it all. So, yeah, sorry, I know that's a long answer, but my challenge anyone is where is he? He's here. He's not left us. He's not abandoned us. He's not forsaken us. He's here. Why he's allowing it to go the way it is, that's a mystery. And for those of you that aren't Christian, I'm sure there will be somebody listening there. I know that probably seems like a really pat answer, like, oh my gosh, Christians. But the Bible really does give us that mystery. This isn't us making this up later on. Like, this very much is true. It's like, there are times where it seems very clear we understand what God said, and there are times that not. The question is, to the heart is, are we willing to trust him? And why should we be willing to trust him? Well, not only does he have the faithfulness of all of Christian history, but look at the cross. A God that was willing to suffer for our sake can't also be at the same time a God who doesn't care about a pandemic. It just doesn't. It's not going to line up. So yeah.
Good word.
That's great.
Good word. As you're saying, I'm thinking this, the passage from Romans 8 where it says, if God was willing to give his son, how much more will he give all things to his children, right? So that's your argument there. Ultimately, if the cross is the ultimate expression of it, then we can't look at a pandemic and say, no, he's going to fall short on this one. He has never fallen short, and that's already been expressed perfectly in the cross. Shawn, I see you open your Bible there, some scripture.
Yeah, I was just thinking as Lou was talking on this topic of doubt. I think it's a really good point you're bringing up, because these type of situations can cause so much. A lot of people haven't been through this type of situation where it's not just this health crisis of people getting sick. There's the economic crisis that is coming. There's so many things that are attached to this that a lot of people haven't been through this widespread of a thing to even know how they would respond. So we can always try to prepare for situations like, when we do fire drills in order to be prepared for when the fire actually happens, the kids know what to do at the school, right? And this is just something that none of us could ever really prepare ourselves for. So I think there will be people might be surprised by some of their responses. And I think for those of us who may be on more of the side of we're going to get through it, but tend to be more calm mannered and it's going to be okay. I think it's our responsibility to really try to care well for those who may be more in a bit of a panic and a little bit more anxiety prone and have a lot more fear. Is different. And that topic of doubt that you brought up, Lou, I think is good. I think one of the encouraging passages for me around this topic has actually been the Great Commission in Matthew 28, verse 16 says, then the 11 disciples went to Galilee. So these are the 11, these are the guys who are going to go out. Went to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Now this is out of the 11 that are about to be now commissioned to go start the church. When we think about all the interviews we do of people, all the, making sure everybody crosses this I, crosses this T, dots this I, and appointing people over leadership, which I think we should do. We should care very carefully over who gets appointed in particular leadership roles. I'm just bringing that up to say is we take it very seriously, as we should. And so did Christ. And he sent people out. Some doubted. This is after he rose. And I'm just thinking, doubt does not, I like what Lou was saying about how we doubt. Doubt does not just, it doesn't put us in this place of shouldn't put us in this place of shame. It's how do we doubt? Do we take our questions to God? And that's why I started with the idea of giving permission, the Bible giving us permission to even bring these questions, because I think it is critical that we actually come to God with these things and wrestle through them with him. So when we ask the question, where is God amidst this type of pandemic, I think we should ask that question, not maybe to Google or to others, which are totally fine. I think ask that question to God. Make it personal. Where are you in this? And the thing that I see God continually doing throughout history is using difficult and trying circumstances, using persecution to actually mobilize his people in a different and a new way. I think about some of the things that I've been through in my life while missionary, and the really, really hard times that I faced were actually times where God was doing something in me. He was shaping me. He was molding me in a way that I could then be used. So what I want to ask people is instead of asking, ask the question, where are you, God, in that theological framework, and really work out, what's the theology of suffering and the theology of, God's providence over that. I think that's all good, but don't miss the God, where are you currently in my life? What are you currently wanting to do in me right now, so that I come through this not the same person? Because I think I want to ask that question to people. It's like, who are you going to be at the end of this? When this passes over? Now, who knows how it will pass over, what time it will take, but how are we engaging with God right now, so that we're shaped to be a different person on the other side of this in the future? And that might come in the fact that, having an international perspective, because I've traveled the globe so much, it's like I can't help but to think about the things that I make a big deal about that are not a big deal, that are just regular life in many, many cultures. And so what I want to kind of ask those of us who are here and actually may have a little bit more privilege than others is like, how will this shape us? And I think caring for those who have less, I think of child sponsorship. So right now there's a huge thing going on in the schools, because a lot of families needed the schools to provide some meals for their kids. And we want to continue to acknowledge that as something that is hard. As the church, we need to figure out how can we step in and be a part of this solution currently right now. And then as we go forward, I think my mind wants to shift to, okay, now once we're back on the program and things have been corrected, because I believe they will be, now how do we actually take the same framework and apply it globally and say, you know what, there are people who currently don't have a meal today, and we just went through this. So how am I now gonna, once we're kind of lifted back up and back in the place that society where we hope to be, how are we now gonna look out and care for those who don't have a meal, and maybe do something like child sponsorship? And then speaking to what Lou was saying, just what are the things we're noticing about where our priorities were off when we were allowed to go wherever we wanted and move at a pace that was maybe unhealthy for a lot of us? I think I'm learning a lot about what it means to actually be with my family and where my priorities lie. And I'm constantly asking this question to God, what are you doing in me right now during this? So that's another angle that I want us to be asking that question, where is God? Is not just theologically in the grand scheme of things, yes, but like actually now, currently here for me in my heart, where is God? What is he doing? And I think if we engage in that question, I think we might be challenged quite a bit, but I think we'll be encouraged because God is with us. And just like Lou said, he cared enough to come. He's not forsaken us in this time.
Yeah, and that's really, I appreciate that perspective. I was just thinking as you were saying that about our worship leader from Kittery, Lou, you remember Casey. Casey shared this past Sunday, as we've kind of combined our campuses, she was sharing that, she thought she was doing okay. And then this past week was really like, okay, I really need to give him control. Like, and one of the things that's been stirred up personally for her is that she wants things to be buttoned up and squared away, and they're not in this situation. And so, Shawn, to your point, that's stirring up something in her, and we can default sometimes to the theological discussion and land there and say, well, now I have a theology of providence or a theology of pain and suffering, when God is saying, that's good, I want you to do that, but I want you to get down to your heart and soul level, because I want something to change in you. I was just jogging this morning and thinking to myself, it'd be interesting to put out a video and entitle it something like, you can be the exception. And then saying the reality is, when you look at our country's history, in recent history, go back to 9/11 and post 9/11, there was this, we're all in this together, we're going to do everything we can. And then that quickly just kind of, it took a dive, because we kind of went back to life as normal. And the exception is the person who gets changed and says, I'm really going to start living differently because of this situation. I'm going to see the world differently and actually live it differently. So I appreciate that challenge. Lou, I want to kind of turn to you on that question and ask, what have you experienced personally, as much as you're willing to share? And then maybe also, what have you seen as far as the Christian response to this, that you said, wow, here's some of the beauty in the midst of the fire or the ashes?
Yeah, no, I'll be very honest. Like my initial reaction to this, I'm ashamed to say what it was. I mean, I was frustrated because my plans were messed up. Like that was my initial thought. I was like, dang, I had this plan and I was speaking here. And it actually, I'm glad you actually brought this up, because it made me really think of the sermon you gave a year ago about busyness. I don't know if you remember specifically. I don't remember the title but you just talked about how that's the new phrase to say I'm important. It's like, how's your life? Oh, I'm just so busy. And it's so true. Like we just want to, it gives me a sense of value to know that I'm constantly doing something. And so God just really showed me how much my heart wasn't initially, oh my gosh, people are suffering. My heart wasn't initially, oh my gosh, people are losing jobs. My heart initially was, oh my goodness, I really like doing all this and I can't anymore. And I just was so convicted and humbled to see like, wow, do I love preaching the gospel? Yeah. But I also love the travel and the hustle and bustle of that. And the question is, do I love those equally, or is one above the other? And or is an ordering of those? Like, wow, that's terrible. So that's been something the Lord's actually just been showing me. And I'm sure that's actually for a lot of us, he's just showing us how much we value, just the way we get to just the busyness of life, because it just makes us feel important. So that's been that initial difficult part. And I've always just been a kind of go-getter and wanting to keep doing so. So the idea of sitting down and working has just been difficult for me. I know Shawn has struggled with that as well. We were talking about it this morning. We're both like, I'm just over it. I'm over just sitting. I was like, I want to go do something. But what's probably been the most, I've loved seeing how quickly the church has used their digital platform to speak into this. Like I already know so many churches have already had like live streams and stuff, but the amount of things that I'm seeing on my feed, both on Instagram and Facebook, and you see it on Twitter, it's just like, there's so many Christians doing everything they can to be like, you know what, let's buckle up and let's get out as much as we can. And then also just to see, thinking of the initiatives that Christians are trying to do when it comes to like meals for kids that in Atlanta that would otherwise not get that meal every single day because of school, that they're not going there anymore. Or I know the church that I know back home, that they're using their church as a place where a bunch of stores are stocking up their food to then distribute out. Like just finding unique ways to be a light when everything seems so dark. And this idea that we don't have to be the ones panicking. I've loved that. I've definitely seen the far side where people are like, this is clearly it's Armageddon. Get ready because Christ is coming back right now. So I've seen a little bit of that, but the majority of it, I feel like I see Christians being very calm and collected and saying, you know what, this is really difficult. But the Lord is still sovereign. He's still on his throne. And we're going to use this as an opportunity to love on people that we haven't been doing a good job at lately. Because we've been so focused on ourselves. This is a great time for us to actually start sacrificing in a time that, we feel like we probably shouldn't be sacrificing, right? Because the economic certainty of everything is out of whack. We have no idea. I think I see the generosity of Christians and non-Christians. So I don't want to just pump up Christians. I'm just saying specifically what I see in the church. It's just been very encouraging to me. It's very inspirational to me to be like, wow, the body of Christ as a whole, because you very rarely get to see it as a whole. You only ever see what your congregation or where you're at. I've loved to see, RZM itself, like so many things got canceled, but we've been trying to do as many live stream events. I know last Tuesday I actually did one with Dr. Brandon Unruh from Harvard. We were supposed to be up at UNH last week, and Tim was supposed to be there with us doing a mission of sorts, like a 2-day events series. But since it got canceled, we still did it. And he was talking about anxiety, and as a clinical psychiatrist, how do we navigate both the medical and clinical side of this, but then also as a Christian, how do we view these sort of things? And I'm just so grateful that we can continually use, a digital platform during this time, because I think people are craving a hope. And that's another thing last thing I'll say on this, because I know, again, some people may be listening that are really on the fringes of their faith and maybe not really agreeing with what we're saying. Not to get so pragmatic and so practical, but I do want you to wrestle with what is your answer outside of this type of thing. Because it's one thing to say, all right, fine, whatever, I can't believe the Christian faith because this doesn't make sense to me. Okay, great. Then what worldview are you going to? Because you're going to have to go to some worldview. And if it's completely naturalism, that this is just the way it is, pandemics are quite natural. Like they're kind of it. They happen and people die. This is, if you're going to completely come from that naturalist point of view, it's like, this is just kind of the way things are. There's no reason to be outraged. It's just kind of be like, survive and pass it on and do whatever. But that's not the way any of us feel. We feel so distraught. And I think that says something about it. I think it says that inner longing for some type of tranquility and peace, this inner longing for everything to be made right. What worldview actually provides that hope that you're looking for? Because I've found it to only be Christianity.
Yeah. And if I could add on to that, even looking at some of our desires that come from a situation like this, I think both Christian and non-Christian want to help people in this situation. Like, and this is where I find in these type of situations, I find consistency hard to maintain with particular worldviews. So, for instance, one thing I tried to do as in a missional like approach to my neighborhood was the other day I posted on our neighborhood Facebook page, which can sometimes be quite a toxic environment, where people post pictures of people's like yards or cars that are ugly, and they're like, "What is this speeder doing in the road?" And this isn't good for our neighborhood. Just it could be a horrible place. I posted on there. I was like, "Hey, I know some people are either like not able to, should not, or maybe just scared to go to the grocery store. If anyone, and our neighborhood's pretty big, there's hundreds of houses, but I just gave my personal number. I said, if anyone needs me to go shopping for them, here's my number. Call me or text me, and I'll pair your shopping with one of my shopping trips." And I kind of threw in a joke there. It's not free though. Like, you still have to pay for your groceries. Yeah. And the way that changed the feeling on our Facebook page, all of a sudden other people were like, "Hey, we're doing a blood donation thing here." And the amount of good things that flowed from that thread, no one's taken me up on it, but I still think just the offer did something there for our neighborhood, and had us engaging with our neighbors. People now are like, "Oh, you're the one who like offered to grocery shop." There's a little bit of I think there'll be more of a softness, especially as we're all around the pool, when we finally get the pool open for the summer and whatnot. But there were non-Christians on there wanting to offer to do good things. Mm-hmm. Totally right. But what I want to say with the naturalistic thing, worldview that Lou is bringing up, it isn't consistent with that worldview. If it is survival of the fittest, then why do good for those who are suffering? They should they should be like wiped out in a sense. Mm-hmm. Survival of the fittest, that means the weak don't survive. And so this idea to do good for others, I want to say that's a good thing. And I think the atheist and the Christian both have this desire, but I think it comes from the fact that we're created in the image of God. And that's where that's our foundation as Christians on why we would do this. All people have value. All are created in the image of God. Regardless of your worldview, you have to give an answer for why do you long to do good? And that's a key thing. So for the Christians out there, this is a great opportunity to actually, in witnessing to some of your non-Christian, maybe someone who holds more of a naturalistic view, it is to actually find those moments where the image of God is poking through in them posting something about, natural, like relief, like donate to this. Like, and affirm, it starts off on the positive. It says, I really appreciate that you would value people enough to do this type of thing. And it actually makes sense in light of Christianity. It says, love the Lord God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. I'm wondering for you as a naturalist, how do you make sense of that idea that you would want to do good? Because it makes sense to me. And you actually, the way you're living lines up more, I think, with Christianity. So I'm wondering, how do you live this way as a naturalist? How does it fit? And so you're just being curious, while at the same time starting with affirming what they're doing, rather than saying, you're a sinner, and which is one place we can start too. But it's a different way that I've seen these type of things can be used in our evangelistic conversations. And so I know that's more to Christians, but I think if you're non-Christian listening, I want to actually ask you that question, and like, where do you have this foundation for doing good to others if it's not found within this idea that all humans have value because they're created in God's image? Where is that? And that's a good discussion to have with someone in your community and another Christian that you're close with.
Yeah, that's a good word. And these opportunities get stirred. Those conversations get stirred up when these opportunities arise. All of a sudden, we have a situation that you're like, well, I'm sitting at home. I'm thinking about what my life means in this new reality, and it does start to churn those different thoughts, right? I just want to share. I don't know if Lou, if you saw this on my Facebook page that I posted a video of. My daughter Stella turned from 9 to 10 just this past week, and a pandemic birthday is not a whole lot of fun. Like no parties, no nothing. So my wife took the initiative and reached out to a bunch of family and friends, a lot of our church family, and said, hey, at 3:30 on Friday, we're going to do it like a drive by the house birthday party. And we had probably 50 different cars drive by the house with signs and celebration. At one point, there was a guy who lives up the road from us driving up in this amazing Jeep. Every time he drives by it, he stirs up my covetousness, but I'll deal with that someday. But so he drove by and stopped, and he looked out the window. He said, "What is going on?" And we said, "It's a birthday party." And he was like, "Oh, happy birthday." But to your point, Shawn, he's now seen, a traffic jam in front of our house because of a little girl's birthday. And that's an opportunity at some point when he's driving down the road in the summer with the top of his Jeep off, I can wave at him. Maybe we'll have a conversation. I'm like, wasn't that crazy that happened? Yeah. Now a conversation's open to say, here's how our local church and other friends, absolutely, but our church in particular has responded to this situation.
Yeah, that's so good. And what I love about that is sometimes we can have the pressure on ourselves with evangelism and witnessing for the gospel that we have to have a waterfall, drop on people, and they're just soaked with the truth of the gospel. When what you're talking about, that's like a slow drip, and that God's faithful in all that, and He provides opportunities. It's just to try to find moments where we can, just have that slow, be that drip. In a sense, and hope for the flood and hope for the waterfall moments to come too.
Right. All right. Lou, I want to kind of wrap us up here, but let me give you a chance first, and then I'll give Shawn a chance. What's your charge to the church at this point? What's your charge to somebody who is identifying as a follower of Christ right now, and they're thinking about, okay, I need someone to give me some direction when it comes to how I continue to respond in literally the days and months ahead? What would be your charge and or encouragement? That's a strong word, maybe charge, but what would you say to a Christian who's listening right now as that kind of final parting word?
Yeah, I think one thing I'm noticing more than ever is that my lack of like intentional time with the Lord wasn't because I was busy, and that's kind of really frustrating in my own heart. I think a couple of years ago, John Piper either tweeted, or he probably didn't tweet anything, or somebody tweeted on behalf of John Piper. He said something of the extent, it's like, what history will show us is that because of like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, our lack of prayer wasn't because we lacked time. Mm-hmm. I think it's just so true. It's like, wow, we have so much. And so my biggest challenge for you, but then I'm also throwing it at me, is like, do we take one scripture seriously enough? And I think of Paul's final words in his benediction to the Corinthians. I think it's Corinthians or it's in Thessalonians. He's talking about to, encourage those who are really weary to come alongside this and to be praying without ceasing. That's kind of like this Christian lingo. We kind of mess around with that scripture all the time. It's like, oh yeah, prayer without. It's kind of just a joke around the Christian church. But is this not a time to be praying? For those that are now working from home, get up at the same time, and the time that you would have commuted to your work, be praying that time. For those of you that have kids that were in school, I know they were covered in extracurricular activities. Every kid is nowadays. That time when they were supposed to be at practice, that time that you're going to travel to practice, would you sit down as a prayer, or as a team, or as a family, and pray? It's crazy how quickly we'll just find something else to do, and it still is mindless task. And I'm struggling with it myself, but I'm hoping, and I'm charging just my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ to be like, let's be mindful of that. Let's actually take the time daily. And even if it starts out as for a minute, I don't care, because everybody loves to go from 0 to 100 and then you burn out in like 3 days. If you haven't been taking this seriously, start slow. Maybe it is just every morning getting on your knees and just praying for 1 minute solid, and the next day doing 2 minutes, whatever it is, just build up and just spend time with Him. Not only is that going to give you a peace and a hope, because that's actually, just as Shawn was saying, go to the one that's actually able to do something about this. Because you worrying about something is not going to do a single thing. We know this is scripture. It doesn't add a single hour to your lifespan. What does worrying do? But when you're able to go to the one that is the author of your life, and you're able to do that, I think we'll be very surprised to see how much he yearns for us to come to Him and plead with Him, and to just come with our requests, almost like this incessant neighbor that wants something and knocking at the door. It's like, go to Him. And then lastly, I would just say, man, find opportunities to love your neighbor. As Shawn and Tim were both just saying, find opportunities, like get creative, start thinking outside the box. Like, what are some of if there are people in your neighborhood that just do not have the same resources as you have or something, find a unique way to do that. And I think this is a great time to be discipling your children. You're with them all day, every day now. And I know it's probably, I'm not a parent, so I'm not going to speak too much in this, but as someone that looks into a lot of parents, I know it's extremely difficult. And by the end of it, you probably want to tear out your hair. But what your kids need to know more than anything else is that you yourself need grace as well. And allow them to see the gospel in you, in the way you treat them and the way you treat your neighbors right now. And I think that will have a far more impact on your kids' spiritual well-being than all the extracurriculars that you have them in.
Let me say to folks before I turn to Shawn here is that I'll put a link down below in the description section as well. I just put a video up last night on my YouTube channel about I think it's 6 or 7 ways to make disciples in the midst of the pandemic. So it's from prayer to caring for your neighbor. There's a wide variety of ways to do that. And I think, Lou, to your point, and Shawn, to your point, the trickle versus the waterfall. We all want the waterfall. We all want the big wave, but it tends to be that like God's going to bring the revival when he wants to bring the revival. And we need to be like slowly and steadily loving our neighbors, gentle moments with the kids. Those things add up. I just want my kid to turn around and say, I get it now. Can I read the Westminster Confession of Faith? But that's not going to happen tomorrow. It needs to build to that, right? So, Shawn, let me turn to you. What would be your charge to the church or to Christians at this time?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna. I love I'm looking forward to seeing that video, but also I love everything that Lou shared. I feel like you hit so much there, and especially even starting from that point of like just admitting that you yourself are struggling with this. And I'm with you. Like I think about Blaise Pascal. He wrote in like the 16th century, and he wrote, all of men's miseries come from not being able to sit alone in one's chamber. That's one's room for a modern translation. And I thought this guy had no idea in terms of what we currently have with all of our technological advancement and whatnot. I mean, this is a time when they didn't have the internet and things and yet he says all of men's misery comes from not being able to just be alone for a while. And man, I'm feeling that. I get what he's saying, in that I need to actually learn what does it mean to actually just be still and be with the Lord. So I received that challenge, Lou, and I appreciate it. And I'm seeing the same thing. So I appreciate you saying that. And I think I've already said a few things on the more missional, like loving your neighbor, reaching out. The only thing I'd add on that is just to do it with thoughtfulness, knowing that everyone's going to have different sensitivities. And so you want to be thoughtful and try to put yourself in people's situations. Like some people are like, there's not many people doing this anymore, but some people just don't think it's still such a big deal. And so they might be more prone to be like, people need hugs. And it's like, well, no, actually people don't need hugs right now. That's going to be the unloving thing to do. And so to try to figure out what is the loving thing to do in light of the current situation that we're in. But I think, so since I've already said some things there, I think I would just want to focus on, as a community, I'm having a really hard time with all the digital meetings, honestly. Like even meeting with my small group, it's just difficult. Like I want to be with them. I don't want to look at another screen and have another meeting on a screen. And so I'm having to actually care enough. And because here I have my wife and my kids who I just love being with. But if I have someone else who doesn't have that same type of community, that small group meeting, the most loving thing for me to do is to be on there, even though I don't feel like I want to be on there, because they may really need that community. And so that's the thoughtfulness of loving my neighbor. I need to actually discipline myself and be, how can I love those who don't have family? And so that may mean to reach out and to see, hey, do you want to chat? Okay, so that's those who don't have, wife and kids and whatnot, some of my single friends. Now for the family thing, I think I just want to say, even beyond just spending the time with, the very more spiritual things of what we see as like prayer and Bible reading, I want to obviously say those are good, but even just, again, with that trickle idea, spending time and actually devoted time, putting the phone away, so we're not always looking things up. Even if it is one of those conversations you're having, why is the sky blue? Oh, let's go look that up, like you might usually do. maybe say like, let's park that for later. That way we're not, again, reaching for the device.
Right.
And then we find ourselves all wrapped into the device again.
That's good.
Try
That's
to find other things that we can do that will just be spending time, whether it's reading stories, just taking that time that we haven't had or made before to actually spend that time invested in the kids. It's not always easy. It's challenging. I get tired of reading some of the books that want to be read. I'm very excited when my kids want to read C.S. Lewis or something like that, Narnia or whatever it may be. So just trying to figure out how best to love the family in this situation. But then again, I think I want to go back to that idea of prayerfully thinking through and reflecting on my day and saying, what is God doing and how do I want this to change me in the future? Because again, we are all becoming people, and our behavior creates habits, and our habits create character. So regardless of what we're doing right now, is we are right now becoming a particular type of person. And so what are we doing that will shape us on the heels of this to be different and more like Christ in light of going through this? So I know that's a little bit more general, but I would be thinking through some of those things. I hope that's helpful. But
No,
honestly, Lou, I'm feeling your challenge is really helpful to me too. So thank you guys.
Those are great. That's great advice. I'm going to, ironically, as we're talking about helping and loving our neighbor, I need to go love my family right now because they're trying to do, Shawn, speaking to your point, a Google chat for one of the kids with fellow classmates. So I'll sign off here. Everybody who's watching, again, I'll post links down below to all the different things I've mentioned here. Lou and Shawn, thank you guys for joining me today and taking time to do this. And when I get this posted, I'll send links to you guys as well. So appreciate your time. And hopefully this was helpful to folks as they start thinking about not where is God, or as if he's not around in this whole pandemic, but let's start to have eyes to see where he's actually working. So thank you guys for again for joining me, and thanks to the folks who are watching now. And feel free to leave comments. We'll be interested to hear what your feedback is. All right, take care, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Tim.